My husband screamed at me in front of important guests. I handed him an envelope that shocked everyone. I still remember that day vividly, not because of the tears shed or the silent accusations thrown at me. I remember it because it was the day I realized I would never again allow myself to be a victim in my own life. The event was held at one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city, attended by the most prestigious guests. Strategic partners, potential investors, and friends we had spent our entire youth building relationships with were all there. I had prepared a brief speech to thank everyone for standing by us through the challenging journey. But that moment never came. Before I could even rise to my feet, Colton, the husband who once dreamed alongside me, raised his voice and shouted at me in front of everyone. He did not just blame me for fabricated failures. He subtly cursed me, treating me like a disgrace. The room froze. Startled glances, hushed whispers, uneasy shifting filled the air. Some guests even turned away, as if ashamed to witness what was unfolding. I stood still, silent, not a single tear falling from my eyes, because I had already known. I had overheard the entire plan. It was a scheme to publicly humiliate me, to turn me into a scapegoat, and to seize sole leadership of the empire we had built together. I had prepared myself, patiently and silently. In my hand was a sealed envelope, carefully compiled after weeks of investigation. Inside was irrefutable evidence of betrayal, undeniable documents that could not be brushed aside. As Colton continued to speak loudly, believing he held the upper hand, I calmly slid the envelope across the table to him. The color drained from his face the moment he opened it. Once again, the room fell into heavy silence. But this time, it was not out of pity for me. It was for him. I had once believed in Colton. I believed in the smallest gestures. The way he placed his hand gently on my back as we entered the restaurant. The way he fought for our dreams as they grew ever bigger. I believed that no matter what the outside world said, at least within our home, we stood on the same side. But the truth had been sitting right there, blaring from a forgotten, unlocked phone. I overheard Colton's voice from an empty conference room on the third floor, speaking with a familiar guest, Lydia, and my best friend, Molly. They plotted how to publicly disgrace me in front of our clients. They discussed how to record my emotional breakdown as evidence, to later use it as leverage to strip me of all executive power in the company. In that moment, what resurfaced within me was no longer love. It was no longer even pain. It was a silent vow. I would never again allow anyone to tear down my sky without paying the price. I began gathering evidence. I installed recording devices in meetings, backed up emails, and paid close attention to the files Colton had always kept out of my reach. Every clue, every conversation, every transaction became a weapon in my hands. I was no longer the woman frozen by fear of loss. I was the woman who knew she was fighting for an entire life, not just for herself, but for the values my father had spent his lifetime building. I lived two parallel lives during those months. On the surface, I smiled and played the role of the compliant wife Colton believed he controlled. Inside, I worked in silence, as methodically as an entire investigation team. I reached out to Attorney Owens, a longtime family friend who had helped my father through several major business deals. Owens was the first to advise me not to react impulsively. He said, "In every battle, the one who controls their emotions is the one who holds the real power." Together, we began compiling a comprehensive list of evidence. Recordings, emails, financial transaction copies, and proof of suspicious money transfers. The deeper I dug, the more cracks I uncovered. There were payments to ghost projects, financial contracts signed only under Colton's name. What we had built together began to reveal itself not as a shared achievement, but as a carefully orchestrated deception. I never confronted Colton. I continued to smile, to answer Molly's calls with the same unaffected tone. I wanted them to believe I was still the gullible woman they could easily fool. But deep inside, I knew. The day Colton intended to humiliate me in front of our guests would be the day he faced complete and public defeat. And I would be the one to flip the entire table. From the moment I overheard their scheme, I knew I could not allow my emotions to interfere with my actions. I started building my counterattack systematically and in absolute secrecy. First, I analyzed all the assets and ownership rights tied to the company. Colton held the title of CEO in name only, while the capital contributions were under my name. That loophole would become a critical advantage in my plan. I collected copies of every contract, every financial record, every organizational document. Each night, while Colton slept soundly after his parties with Lydia, I quietly accessed the system and stored every important file in a hidden archive. I secretly consulted with top intellectual property attorneys. I explained my situation to them under the guise of a different project. They guided me on how to transfer key technologies and data rights into my name without alerting Colton. At the same time, I began reaching out to new partners. I compiled a list of our clients, personally sending letters of gratitude and subtly suggesting future collaborations. Everyone thought these were merely sincere notes from an old partner, but in truth, I was rebuilding a new network, one built on direct trust. As the day of the event approached, Colton's confidence and arrogance only grew. I waited patiently, feigning ignorance about the preparations for his grand announcement. He had no idea that every step he took was leading him straight into a trap I had woven with my own hands. I reviewed all the evidence one final time. Photos, emails, recordings, bank transactions, everything neatly organized into my personal files. The envelope was sealed, bearing the official stamp of Attorney Owens's law office. In the final nights before the party, I steeled myself. Every heartbeat, every glance, every word had to be calculated with precision. I was no longer the pitiful woman he thought he could break. I had become the adversary he was never prepared to face. The party was held at a luxury hotel in the heart of the city, a place where countless major deals had been signed. I entered the space with a calm exterior, but inside, every sense was bracing against the storm raging within. Colton had staged a performance. He joked with the guests, laughing with Lydia as if everything was merely a harmless business mishap. But I could see through it all. I noticed the subtle glances, the hidden gestures, the way some eyes shifted nervously away from the crowd. When everyone had taken their seats, Colton stood up. He began his speech with a warm, polished smile. He praised my dedication, the team's contributions, and spoke grand promises of the future with our partners. But I saw it in the way he moved across the stage, the glances exchanged with Lydia at the far end of the room, and the way Molly lingered close by, her phone discreetly poised to record. I realized I was standing right at the center of a bridge rigged with explosives. Colton shifted the topic. He spoke of changes, of irreconcilable differences in marriage. Every word he uttered was carefully designed to highlight imaginary flaws he attributed to me. He paused, scanning the room to ensure the atmosphere of detachment had reached its peak. Then, with a syrupy line he had no doubt rehearsed, Colton announced publicly that we would be separating. The entire room fell silent. At that moment, I stood up. No shouting, no bitter laughter. I silently placed the envelope in front of Colton. He looked stunned, but he tried to maintain his composure as he opened it. And when the contents unfolded, contracts transferring intellectual property, evidence of illegal financial activities, recordings of his conversations with Lydia, everything he had planned to destroy me with was now binding him in chains. The room gasped. I began to speak, my voice steady and clear without raising it. I laid out everything Colton had done. The secret plotting, the emotional manipulation with Lydia, the calculated betrayal with Molly. Each piece of evidence was placed before the audience, undeniable and legal. I did not ask for sympathy. The truth alone was enough to make them ashamed. And Colton, the man who thought he was orchestrating the downfall, could only stand there helplessly as everything crumbled around him like a house of cards. He remained frozen, clutching the pile of documents with trembling hands, his fingernails scratching lightly against the stiff paper. Molly and Lydia, his co-conspirators, started showing signs of panic. Molly's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. I kept speaking, each word falling like small hammer strokes against their carefully constructed facade. I recounted how Lydia had exploited my trust. How Molly, once my dearest friend, had recorded my moments of weakness to turn them into weapons against me. The guests, who had been laughing and chatting merrily moments before, began murmuring among themselves. Disgust and disdain clouded their faces. No one wanted to associate with schemers, especially when their deceit had been exposed in front of everyone. Colton tried to say something, but his lips only moved silently. He understood the battle had been lost long before his speech had even begun. I turned to the event coordinator, placed my hand gently on the microphone, and said, "I apologize for subjecting you all to such a painful spectacle. Today, we will not be signing any contracts, but we have all received a valuable lesson about trust and honor." I nodded politely at the stunned guests and slowly made my way out of the room. Behind me stood Colton, Molly, and Lydia, the ones who had gambled their youth for ambition and wealth, only to be left with nothing but disgrace. I walked out of the hotel under the soft yellow lights scattered across the street. No one followed me. No one needed to offer any apologies or explanations. The truth had already spoken for itself. In the days that followed, Colton tried to explain himself to the press. He claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that there was a conspiracy to ruin his reputation. But the evidence was undeniable. People no longer cared about his excuses. Investors withdrew one by one. Signed contracts were canceled. The company began to crumble from within. Within 3 months, Colton lost his position as CEO, forced out by the board of directors. As for Lydia and Molly, they became pariahs in the business world. Lydia was dismissed from another company's project due to her unethical behavior. Molly had to shut down the small business she had built. And what about me? I did not become a victim. I did not demand apologies I knew would never be sincere. Instead, I took the time to rebuild my life. I became the founding director of a new company, smaller but full of promise. I partnered with people who genuinely believed in integrity. That night at the party was not just a memory of betrayal. It was the hinge on which I rebuilt myself into the woman I had always aspired to be. A woman who was strong, clear, and independent. I first learned to forgive myself. Forgive the regrets. Forgive the shame of having trusted the wrong people. I realized that the greatest damage was not being betrayed, but letting that betrayal define who I would become. I chose to continue believing in humanity, but this time I knew better. I chose partners who built relationships on transparency and genuine trust. My new company grew steadily, not just in profits, but in reputation for credibility. I also gave myself permission to live authentically. I tried things I had never dared before. Enrolling in art classes, traveling alone to new cities, and even adopting a small, clumsy puppy. There were no more mornings waking up with fear or doubt. Each day was a conscious choice, to choose gratitude over regret, trust over suspicion, and myself over those who were unworthy. At night, when I looked out the window, the streetlights still cast a golden glow across the pavement. The scene was the same, but the person standing there had changed forever. I became the witness and the proof that being betrayed is not the end. It is merely a question mark prompting us to become a better version of ourselves. I no longer cared about gossip. The rumors and the whispers were now just the sound of the wind passing by. I had moved beyond the need to prove anything to the world. I was living for myself. Each morning, I savored small but meaningful moments. A fragrant cup of coffee by the window. A half-read page from a beloved book. A soft tune filling my little kitchen. These were the moments I once missed while chasing the expectations of others. I reconnected with my family and true friends, the ones who stood by me even when I had nothing left but myself. We laughed, we cried, and we remembered the old days not with pain, but with gratitude for how far we had come. One afternoon, while walking my little dog in the park, I bumped into an old business partner. He did not bring up the past. He did not mention Colton or that fateful night. He simply said, "I heard you are rebuilding from scratch. We would love to invest in people like you." I smiled. A real smile, born from gratitude and self-respect. I had not crumbled. I had not allowed a man or a betrayal to define my worth. On the day I signed the new contract, I wore a simple ivory dress. No expensive suits to project power. I no longer needed to prove anything. My strength shone through on its own. I realized that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself again. And it is in the darkest nights that we learn how to light our own path. When I stood before the mirror, I no longer saw the woman paralyzed by fear or humiliated under the weight of countless stares. I saw a woman who was free, brave, and full of faith in life. I had crossed over. I had grown from the ruins. And I knew that the new chapter of my life had only just begun. If you are searching for a place where your voice can be heard, where your pain is understood, and where your inner strength can be rekindled, come visit her side of the story. Here, every story is a journey of healing. Each voice becomes a beacon for hearts that have once been broken. We believe that every shattered heart can be reborn and that you never have to walk alone.